Hi guys, welcome to the first annual Zoom, I want to call it a master class, so I'm going to. It's the
master class.
It is a master superhero class. The Mark Gruenwald Comic Book Creation Competition Challenge. This is how to be a comic book creator. It is going to be one of 3 parts of a series. We have 2 illustrious local Wisconsin artists with us today to be able to answer your questions. They're going to be talking mainly about how to create story, how to build character. Now, I'm sure the ones that have already started your comic books know that creating a character is kind of the most important part of your story, because how do you know what they're going to do if you don't know who it is? So thank you all for coming tonight. I hope that we learn a lot of things. I also want to thank the sponsors of the Mark Gruenwald Comic Book Creation Competition, the Winnebago Area Literacy Council, Zeroni's, House of Heroes, and Oshkosh Public Library. Craig Knitt, he is the winner of the adults competition of last year, so let's all listen to him. Craig, thank you for being here.
Thank you guys for having this. I'm really excited. My job today is to get you guys excited and inspired about your own creativity and your own stories that you want to share. So I'm super excited by that. Now, one of the things that when I was about your age, I got absolutely hooked on comic books, absolutely hooked, because I couldn't, actually when I was probably a little bit younger than you guys, because I couldn't quite read perfectly yet, but I could understand how the stories would fit together with the pictures, and I could kind of infer how the stories kind of laid themselves out. And my favorite ones were scary short stories, and one of them was about the head of the household, and you can guess what the head of the household was at the end of the story. Ooh, it was an actual head. And it was a wonderful little story told in maybe 5 pages. So they worked really well for my attention span at the time, and I didn't necessarily have to understand all the words that were in there to understand the creepiness of this story. So I really enjoyed that. Now, from there, I've always loved the Marvel Monster comic books. And actually, when I was really young, this is an original page from the Frankenstein Monster. And this is when he thawed out. If you look at that, he was frozen in a block of ice, and he thawed out. And I actually have 2 pages in this sequence. And this was something that I absolutely loved. And I used to draw from the original comic books as a kid, just to kind of learn how to do that. And I had I've got a page from the Living Mummy as well, that I would draw from that head that was on that page in my own practices. And to actually have the one-of-a-kind original pieces is a really big deal. Now, when I started teaching, I worked with, I went to school in Oshkosh at the college, and guess what? Guess who else went to Oshkosh College? Mark Gruenwald. So he's the guy that this whole contest is kind of revolving around. And Mark grew up in Oshkosh. So how many of you guys grew up in Oshkosh or are growing up in Oshkosh right now? We have a lot of kids from Oshkosh? I'm sure we do. And that is something to be exceedingly proud of. I mean, I love the fact that Mark is from the state of Wisconsin. I think that's just glorious. And when I was doing my teaching, one of my supervising teachers actually was a friend of Mark, and sent him a letter saying, hey, my student teacher is really into comic book illustration, and you're at Marvel right now. And he was at Marvel. He had already kind of drawn a couple of the comics, but then he got even more famous for writing the comics and editing the comics. So he kind of raised in this ladder in the organization to become this really beloved person at Marvel Comics, which is super cool. And Mark actually sent me a gift package of some of the pages that he drew. So these are actually pages that Mark Gruenwald himself helped to draw and write. And this was from a Hawkeye book. So these are actually pretty old. And I'm not gonna lie, this this is probably not his best foray into illustration, but I mean, he's a lot further than I am as far as getting a piece of work into a Marvel comic. And I really like how some of this stuff is inked up here. He also sent me some pages that he wrote and other people did. This was a gigantic page from DP7, which was a new universe thing that he had created. And if you kind of look at the close-up stuff, it's pretty cool. But look at how much bigger this one is compared to some of the other sizes of a normal comic page. So this is probably the size of pages that they did in the 40s and 50s. They probably drew this big, but this is probably the size that they did from, Rob, what would you say? From the 60s on? Probably did.
I know different artists varied on what sizes. I know Kirby worked pretty big.
Well, and he comes from that early time.
Yeah.
That's not really a big surprise. But the very first cool starting point, no matter what it was that got you excited into comics, and for Mark, he loved almost all of the superhero stuff. And from what I understand from one of the stories that his wife told, is that he and his friends would love to dress up like the Justice League in downtown Oshkosh and run around in costumes and stuff like that. And I think, wow, that's really funny. That's really crazy. But as far as your stories are concerned, there are some really cool ways of starting. And I'm going to want some help on this one. So what I need somebody to fill in the blank for this first statement. Once upon a time, there was a blank.
How about cat?
A cat? What type of cat?
Scottish fold.
A what?
A Scottish fold.
Scottish fold?
It's, black, I guess.
A black cat. Perfect.
Okay. I will. And we're gonna. His name is going to be Scott. Can we use that, Avery?
Oh yeah.
Okay, that will be his name. Once upon a time, there was a black cat whose name was Scott. Okay, that's the starting point of our story. Now here's the second part. And every day, Scott would blank. What would Scott do every day?
He ate Zeroni's pizza every day.
Perfect. That's a sponsor. I'm sure they're gonna love it. And every day, Scott would eat Zeroni's pizza. All right? Now, here's our next part. This is how his day works every day. Every day, he eats Zeroni's pizza. Until one day, blank. I need another answer for that.
He began to get old.
The pizza got old?
No, he did.
Oh, until Scott began to get old. Okay. So, once upon a time, there was a black cat named Scott, and every day Scott would eat Zeroni's pizza until one day Scott became very old. And because of that, blank.
He turned gray?
Perfect. He turned gray. And because of that.
How about he decided to go to a restaurant?
Now, as you can guess, we got one more, and because of that.
Got fat.
He got fat. Okay, whose was that? Was that Ruins?
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
that was me.
That's beautiful. And now we're to almost the final part of it. Until finally,
He worked out.
he had to work out to trim down. Very good. Now we can look at this, and I want you guys to think of the moral of the story as I'm going through this. Once upon a time, there was a black cat named Scott, and every day Scott would eat Zeroni's pizza until one day Scott became very old. And because of this, he turned gray. And because of that, he went to a restaurant. And because he went to that very same restaurant, he got fat until finally he had to go and work out to trim himself back down. So what is the moral of our story?
Eating at restaurants make you fat, but you can fix that.
Perfect. That's perfect. Now we've just told a story using a kind of a little formula. And now this formula I've used a lot in improv, where we're actually kind of breaking that down into things. And Sandy, I did send you that story structure.
Let me look.
There you go.
Oh,
There it
there,
is.
I see it.
Once upon a time, there was a blank. And now the first answer that I think it was Avery gave was a cat. Is that what she said? But now
Yes.
we can add detail to our characters. And Rob's going to talk a little bit more about characters in just a little bit. But we can enhance our characters, and even giving it a color is a little bit more descriptive. So all of a sudden our readers can understand a little bit more of what we mean. So we could describe that cat until we've over-described that cat. Once upon a time, there was a black one-eyed cat named Scott who had a piece of fur on the back that had a white streak, making him look like a skunk at times, but he really wasn't a skunk, but he was often misunderstood. And so all that description can kind of come into that very first line of introducing our character. And every day, Scott would eat Zeroni's pizza. And again, I think Zeroni's pizza is going to love that we're using that as an example, especially when you eat it every day. Well, you got to love Zeroni's pizza every day. But we could even be more descriptive in that too. So every day he would eat delicious Zeroni's pizza with the most spicy sausage he could imagine, until one day he became too old. Until after 50 years of eating Zeroni's pizza, he was just too old to use his teeth on the pizza anymore, and the spiciness wouldn't sit in his stomach very well. And because of that, he turned very sad and very gray. And because of that, he had to go to a restaurant for the first time to have applesauce, which was the only thing that his poor little soft teeth could eat. And because of that, he ate so much applesauce, he got fat. Until finally, he had to work out so that he'd get a little bit stronger again, and he'd be able to eat Zeroni's pizza once again. So this is really interesting to me. As you guys told that story, we made a full circle. So he got back to the point where he was at the beginning of the story, where he actually had to trim himself back down. But was he the same? No, he was changed. He was a better person, or a better cat, because he made that full circle around his story. So I think it's pretty obvious how important characters are, because within the first sentence of our story, we had our character introduced. So we want to know who our main protagonist is, our main character, right away at the beginning of our story, so we know who to root for and we know who the story is going to be about. So Rob, why don't you take over a little bit from there and share with us some stuff that you know about characters?
Well, should we do a drawing of Scott? We can do that.
I would love
You
that.
are
That
a
would be
master
great.
with cats too, my friend.
Yes.
That would probably be right up your alleyway.
Yeah, we could maybe show him at a certain stage of the story. I'm thinking, what do you guys think would be the most interesting stage that he would be at? Maybe like when he's elderly and maybe put on a few pounds, or lost some teeth, eating pizza, applesauce. You guys have any suggestions?
I think it would be cool if we drew him when he was all gray and there was a bunch of Zeroni's pizza boxes around him.
That sounds great. Okay, well, we'll do that. Should we make him a little kind of on the heftier side?
Oh,
Just kind of
absolutely.
more bolder, interesting shape. One of the things about
you got Pat.
One of the things about character design, I guess the thing that I always focus on the most, other than features and color and things like that, I guess is the overall shape of the character. They have a really distinct shape. Like, think of a really well-known character that you can identify immediately when you see, like see if you saw their silhouette, you would know exactly who they are. Like somebody like SpongeBob.
SpongeBob was the first one I was thinking of.
Mickey Mouse or Batman. They all have a very, very distinct shape, and you know exactly who that character is, even if you just saw just a black silhouette, solid silhouette of them. I always like to start out with thinking of what some of the different shapes are. Here's some drawings I've done over the past few years or so. Here's a character I did for a friend of mine. It's based on a character that he created. This guy is kind of like he is like an elf type character, but he's like kind of like a warrior guy with crossbows, and he's kind of a thin, muscular, kind of sneaky character. And he's kind of got sharp features. He looks kind of angry, kind of a surly looking guy. You can kind of see his shape. He's real, kind of stealthy.
Like an angry chicken.
Yeah, exactly. And like here's another character. Here's one of my characters. It's a two-headed monster type guy. Now he just looks like a big slab, basically like a big lumbering, gigantic, boulder-looking character. Does that tell you anything about his personality, possibly? Look at this guy. He's kind of a bigger character, but when you look at his face, he looks kind of sweet and innocent type, and he's reading a book. But yet he still has a big giant axe on his back here. Looking at different shapes. Here's another one. Here's a Halloween character. See, he's kind of looks like a gourd, even though his head's a pumpkin. He's kind of gourd shaped, lanky, kind of mischievous looking.
So it sounds like, Rob, you think more of shapes and elements of their personality that you want to put into them more than exactly what they're going to look like at first?
Well, that's kind of, the shape part of it is kind of like the first thing that comes to my mind. We'll draw Scott the cat here. And we'll start out, I usually start out with real basic shapes first, real circular circles. So, Scott, we're picturing him, we'll maybe draw him at his largest size. So hopefully you guys can see you guys see that okay so far?
When you're drawing light, we're not going to be able to see it, but when you darken it, I think we'll be able to see it.
Yeah, maybe I'll do this with a pencil. Actually, maybe this.
There you go.
Draw his head in first. And let's draw him pretty thick. Pretty big body. Maybe we'll have some kind of like stubby little arms here. I have, instead of having real sharp features, Scott is, what do you think his personality is like? You think he's kind of a laid back, kind-hearted character, or?
Is Scott a cat that jumps up on your lap and wants to get petted and purred and cuddled all day?
Probably not.
He's kind of antisocial, like a lot of cats are sometimes.
Probably doesn't want to share his pizza.
Yeah. Well, here we'll have
pizza for himself.
Slice of pizza here. You guys kind of see what I'm drawing so far?
Yes.
You can see that. So we got his lower legs. You see his dominant shape is pretty circular. Draws his feet in here, and maybe we'll have him sitting on top of a pile of empty Zeroni's pizza boxes. He's on a first name basis with the delivery guy. Okay, so we got a pretty round features here, and we'll draw on his face. And he had kind of like tufts of gray hair, right? So he's been kind of locked into his house, eating. So he's kind of a little unkept. So he's kind of got some crazy bedhead going on here.
He lives in the alley behind House of Heroes, and every day he goes over to the Winnebago Area Literacy Council to see if they'll give him any sort of treats.
Cats usually have, I guess some cats have big eyes, some have, usually, yeah.
Rob, while you're drawing, I could share with them some of the tips that I picked up at some of the workshops I've had this summer too.
Sure. Yeah.
Because one of the things, gang, that I learned from, I took a professional comics class with a Joe Kubert school. My teacher's names were Jan Dorsema, who did a ton of comics when I was younger.
Yes.
And did a lot of work with Star Wars. In fact, she was an artist for Dark Horse Comics doing Star Wars books. And some of her characters, at least one of her characters, became a character in the movie, which is super cool. I love that, the thought of that. And then another one of my teachers was Carly Ide, and she is actually a Green Bay Appleton artist who, very, very wonderful artist. But the thing that I learned is how much planning and how much work goes into all of the sloppy copies that you make before you actually make some of your final artwork. And when I'm working on my comic pages, I'll make these really sloppy little layouts that help me quite a bit in the process of laying it out. So it's like, take a look at these things. These are sloppy, these are terrible, but this helps me to get to the final point where I need to be.
I was wondering, Craig, between your first idea for last year's comic and the final iteration you turned in, how many copies were there? How many drafts did you do?
There's a binder. I usually will keep a binder of all the different things of stuff that I do, just to make the layouts, to make the notes. When you're thinking about your stories, and I come back to that quite a bit, when you're thinking about your stories, spend some time writing all that stuff down. That should be the very first thing you're doing. And there's a lot of tips that you can read about just writing stories in general. One of the things that they say a lot about is show it, don't tell. And that's a movie making tip too. So like for me, I love to make films, and that is an easy translation from a comic book still picture to a movie, which is a moving picture, but it's a really cool storytelling tool when you can transition from between the two different things.
Hey, Rob, could we get a close-up of what you've been working on?
Yeah,
sure.
That looks awesome.
Wow.
This is Scott, Avery's cat.
Doesn't quite fit on screen, but
There we go.
Wow.
pizza box is not quite done, but.
Now, Rob, what are some tips that you do if you get stuck on how to create a face or how to get the personality in the face? Are there some tips and tricks you could share?
Well, usually when I'm designing a character, sometimes I'll get frustrated if I'm just not quite nailing it and I don't quite like the design. I mean, I do tons of versions. Then sometimes I get really lucky and if it's for me personally, I feel like I nail it like the first time I draw it, which is rare. Sometimes depending on if you're collaborating with another artist or writer or a publisher, usually they add little things to the mix as far as little background information about that character or how they want him to be portrayed, him or her to be portrayed. And I worked the past 2 years. I've been working on a book series about a cat, an evil space cat. I was just drawing this cat, kind of familiar. But with this cat in particular, he went through a lot of different design changes, and he was an alien, so I wanted him to look kind of more exotic looking, and where I had him have like different weird swirls and patterns on his fur. But then I don't know if it was the author or one of the publishers basically suggested, but this is a cat that has to blend in on Earth and people don't realize he's an alien. So we made him look kind of more like a common house cat. And so we took away some of those weird alien-like features to him. But one of the things with this character is he rarely smiles. He's always got some evil plan. Even though he's kind of the hero of the story, he's not 100% evil. But when you see him, normally he always has a big scowl on his face. To his design, he has a lot of sharp features, sharp teeth. His claws are out a lot. His ears are always kind of sunken down, snarl on his face or scowl. The only time he smiles is if he's doing something mean to somebody. But he has a lovable, cute look to him as well. There's going to be 6 books, but there are currently 4 available right now.
Wow.
The
Wow,
5th
that's
book
impressive.
will be out this year.
It's interesting to hear that neither of you sit down and just make a comic from start to finish in one day and say, I'm done. There sounds like there's a lot of different drafts that go through it, and where you start and where you end up might be completely different from each other. But it was that process that got you there.
Characters really evolve too. Like I've been, for the past few years, I've been trying to develop a character for a webcomic, and it's a 12-year-old female wizard, and her design, it's changed so much. Over time, I add little things to her personality, and it's one of those things that sometimes if you're creating something for yourself, the sky is the limit, and you don't have anyone else's input, which is good to get other people's input. But sometimes you tend to jump around and change things quite a bit.
One of the things that I would say too is that behind me here are some of the pages that I had in the contest last year that I won the adult challenge with. And these 2 pages here were actually illustrated by myself when I was 10, 11 years old. So those are drawings that I redrew. I inked them from an old pencil drawing on loose leaf paper and colorized them and finished it. So this was actually a story about myself as an older version and a younger version kind of coming together, which fits perfectly with what I was doing with my students. So the idea of making a comic in a day is not impossible. That one took me 40 years. That one took me more than 40 years. But to make a comic in a day, there's actually contests. And Rob, you maybe have heard about these too. It's where it's like a 24-hour comic contest where you actually make a comic book that's like, I think like an ash can size. This little size right here is called an ash can size. And you have a 24-page comic book that is done in 24 hours. And it's supposedly, it's a really good challenge. I haven't done it yet because it's hard. It's very hard to be able to stick to something that quick. Although there's something to be said about finishing a project in a day, because most of the stuff that Rob and I probably work on takes an investment of a couple months, if not years, to get some of these things done. So it can be done in a day, but you imagine what the results will be. They're going to be a little bit different than the results would be if on something that you really have the time and really meticulate at, really work hard at. So what I'm doing for this current story that I'm working on is when coronavirus hit us, gang, I had to figure out how I was going to communicate with my students. I work at the Boys and Girls Club of Greater Green Bay. This is the latest comic book that we did. So we did 4 comic books in the years that I've been there. This summer, we released a graphic novel, which is super thick, and this is stories about their lives. So this is all done by students that are your age at the Boys and Girls Club up in Green Bay. So we've done some beautiful work with that. But with the coronavirus, I had to figure out, all right, how can I connect with my students so that they can still be artistic and they can stay mentally healthy? That was probably the biggest concern that I had, is I wanted everybody to still feel creative and feel social and emotionally healthy. So I thought that it would be a great thing for us to do is to tell our story of what is happening to us during the epidemic. As I was teaching my kids, every day we'd do a different panel and I would do a different one myself. So I had probably 6 pages of panels ready to go But these are all different parts of my life over the last couple of months. And now what I'm doing is I'm pulling parts of them apart, putting them together into a final page, and adding any artwork that I need to add in order to finish, and just kind of telling a chronological story now that makes more sense. If you look at the bottom where I'm kind of posed with my finger in the air and there's some bugs on the wall, there's a whole story, a section about these beetles that all were on the basement wall at my house. And at first I didn't think of how that would really tie into the story, but it kind of becomes a symbol of the coronavirus itself, because the coronavirus is a very tiny thing that's pretty devastating. And another part of the story was where I had a jar of olives that I found in the refrigerator. And I'm like, yay, I found some olives. And I haven't had olives in a long time. And olives are typically expensive. So I tried one and it was spoiled. It was terrible. And you can see that I'm spitting it up in the one panel. That particular part of the story is about how we needed to slow down in our lives in order to really appreciate all the things that we had. Because some of our stuff is spoiling. We're saving it for another time, but we miss out on some of the opportunities that we have in front of us.
Avery or Ruin or Talia, do you want to talk about your experience last year creating your character? Any challenges that
any advice that you guys would have for listeners? Because that's what we want to hear. We want to hear you guys telling what you would give advice to kids your own age about getting their comic pages done.
I have something. Never give up.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
I might not say that much at the moment because I'm drawing my own Scott the Cat or whatever.
Ooh,
cool.
Yeah, I have.
can we see it
that.
before? Can we see it before this is over?
I did it as well. I drew Scott.
Oh, we all want to see him.
What?
Oh, man.
I'm
That's
drawing
awesome.
good right now.
Oh,
He has
that's
a bunch.
Oh,
perfect.
I love that.
Is that the Zeroni's pizza boxes too?
Yeah, I'm not done with it yet.
Talia, you said that you also drew Scott the Cat?
I did, yes, but it's kind of like a sad Scott almost.
We would love to
That's
see
When he's
it.
old.
Yeah, I'd love to see that.
Holy
Oh,
mackerel,
wow.
that's amazing.
Thank you.
Wow, he
Great.
does.
He's kind of like he's had too much to eat. He's creeping down the alley.
Yeah.
Now, I
Wow.
love it. I love the fact that you guys were able to take our little throwaway story and turn it into some characters that could actually be used for something.
You guys are really talented. Wow.
Absolutely. Avery, do you have a question or a comment?
Well, the comic I've already started my comic. I just want to say it's called Super Kitty. About this, at the end of every comic, he turns back into Mittens, the house cat. But every day he comes back into Super Kitty. It's kind of like his identity thing. Oh yeah, and in the first one, the villain is called the Sticker Snatcher. Of course, he snatches stickers.
It sounds like you've really worked on the story components, Avery. And what I've learned today is you really need to have your story before you start drawing some of your parts of your comic. So good job already being that far ahead. What is your character in this year's comic book, Ruin?
The same as last year's. I have like 5 or 6 characters that I just stick with. Sometimes I make new ones, but I have like a couple main characters that I use. This isn't a good picture, it's just rough. Everything on here about the character is supposed to be red, that isn't black.
Very cool.
And
That's
has your
then here's
character,
a mini drawing of it.
has he always
Well,
looked like that, or has he changed?
Originally, some of the details on him were different, but
Okay.
I haven't really changed him up yet because I made him only a couple of years ago. So
Okay.
But as you guys are creating things, don't be afraid to make sloppy copies, because that planning part is so important. Any artists are lucky when they hit it the first time through. But if you get into the habit of making plans with the pages and the work that you're doing, and even jotting down notes, it's like, okay, this isn't part of my story now, but maybe this will fit in some other place. Well, I'll just remember it. No, don't do that. Write it down. Because so many times this part of my body lets me down. My brain can't remember everything, and I've lost so many wonderful, wonderful ideas. And Rob is shaking his head, and I'm sure that he understands too.
Yeah, I have my iPhone. I keep notes for new ideas and concepts, and then I have a document on my computer, and I took several, and they loose leaf paper laying around, and I sometimes have to kind of bring it all into one list. But another thing I was going to say off of what Craig was saying is, don't throw away your old sketches that you don't like. Hang on to them, because you learn a lot from going back and looking at those old versions of a character. Like once you get a character you really like in a design, you can go back and see how you grew and how you improved. My daughter is a really talented artist, and she tends to throw away her older stuff that she doesn't like. She just tosses it, and I always take it out of the garbage and save it so I can show her later.
Excellent, excellent.
Ruin, let's see what you brought for us, and then we'll say goodnight for tonight, and hopefully we'll see you all next week. Okay.
And next week we're going to be working on the artistry and the page layout and some of the professional practices that people have used to help you guys out.
Like a couple of years ago, when I thought of this character that I just showed you, I had a lot of time, so I drew a bunch of different comic titles, and I put them all in this binder. And a couple of them, I actually made comics of. Oh, the comic of it.
Cool.
Whoa.
Wonderful.
Ruin, did you see that Rob has his own binder too? So you guys are...
I just keep ideas for certain projects. I keep them all in one big binder so I can just easily go back and look at old concepts and pictures, and everything's all in one, just like what you have there.
We're going to stop this one now. Craig and Rob, I'll see you in 15 minutes. Ruin, Avery, and Talia, hopefully I'll see you next week, and keep on drawing. The Mark Gruenwald Comic Book Creation Challenge runs from now through August 31st. For all of the information on registering and the rules, go to oshkoshpubliclibrary.org. To finish your comic and turn it in, you can take it to House of Heroes. You can take it to the Wisconsin Area Literacy Council, Zeroni's, or Oshkosh Public Library. And also, thank you for joining the Facebook page. See you next week, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.